First of all, welcome to everyone. I know it's early for some people, California and beyond, and I'm sure others are going to be joining us as we go along. But we thank you for being here at our 31st annual Global Network meeting. We used to meet every year in a different country, but because of COVID, that kind of got zapped. And so now here we are. But we're glad that you all came today. The Global Network was created in 1992 to stop the arms race from moving into space. The co-founders at the time were the Florida Coalition for Peace and Justice, where I worked, Carl Grossman, the journalism professor from Long Island, New York, and the Citizens for Peace and Space from Colorado Springs, Colorado. So at that time, we realized that the space arms race was getting bigger all the time, and we needed to really develop a national and international organization to educate people about what's going on. So that's how we began. We're going to keep everybody muted just to keep the distractions out, but we invite you to go to the chat and say who you are and where you're from. Introduce yourself to everybody else. The talks are going to be 10 minutes each. If they run over, I'll give them 2 minutes leeway, and after that, I've already warned everybody that we've arranged for their chair to drop through the floor of their home. So we're taking extreme measures to keep people in line. After the talks, there's 6 talks. First, Dave Webb will start with a video that he's made, kind of overviewing the current situation. But Dave is the chairperson of the Global Network, our board chair. He lives in the United Kingdom. But anyway, after the talks are over, we're going to have a song by Tom Nielsen, singer-songwriter from Western Mass, a longtime Global Network member. And the song is called Elon's Gone to Mars. It's quite an entertaining song. I think you'll all like it. From there, we're going to move into questions and answers, and we're going to invite people to put their questions in the chat so we can take those questions. I want to briefly give you an overview of a legal action that the Global Network is part of. There's a lawyer in California by the name of Julian Gresser. He's the co-founder of the Broadband International Legal Action Network. And he and other lawyers that he works with and other professionals have filed a legal action with the FCC, who supposedly regulates the number of missile launches, satellite launches. And we've given $500 to this legal effort from the Global Network and tried to continually talk about it to our membership. The petition to the FCC by Julian and the others has gone unrecognized by the FCC. They basically ignored it. And the complaints that were filed in this legal document were concerned about crowded orbits and the chance of growing collisions, growing space debris, and the chance of a accelerating disaster called the Kessler syndrome. Also, the environmental impacts of tens of thousands of satellite launches. That includes air pollution, RF radiation pollution, interfering with astronomers' research, and impacts on the ozone layer. And ultimately, the weaponization of satellite mega constellations. They're all dual use, all these satellites these days. The critical legal questions that were introduced were that this unrestrained launch situation is dramatically impacting the international treaty obligations that the United States has signed, such as the Outer Space Treaty and the Moon Treaty. And it's most importantly, categorically refusing, FCC is categorically refusing to comply with the NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Agreement, which requires for major projects like this that have environmental implications, it requires them to do environmental impact studies. So this legal action is continuing and the work is ongoing. I'm going to put this, it's about a 5-page report that Julian Gresser sent me. I'm going to ask Dave to put it on the website. We'll send it out to our listserv in an email so anyone that's more interested in it can get more information. So I think we're about ready to begin. We're going to start with, again, Dave Webb. Dave, please say a few words about your presentation, if you would, and thank you all again for being here.
Thank you, Bruce. This is a re-recording of the presentation I gave at the meeting, this time with a proper voice, my voice. It's recovered now from the cold I had. So I hope this is much better quality than people had to suffer from during the meeting. So, okay, here we go. The militarization and weaponization of space has been going on since the dawn of the space age, but it has recently become very dangerous and extremely worrying. The race for space has always been about missiles, political prestige, and achieving military control of the skies. Its origins were in the Cold War nuclear arms race between the Soviet Union and the United States, and both sides were aided by German scientists and missile technology taken from Adolf Hitler's missile program at the end of World War II. This will be a very brief outline of the space warfighting developments by the United States and examples of how the war in Ukraine is being used to test and improve space warfighting systems. It's mainly focused on the US because that's where we get most information, but also because the US is a major force driving others on to their own developments. Similar things will be happening in China, Russia, India, and elsewhere. Space became the ultimate military high ground in the 1991 Iraq War and became increasingly important in subsequent wars. Then, in 1997, US Space Command released its Vision for 2020, which describes the goal of the US as being to achieve full spectrum dominance, military superiority on land, at sea, in the air, in space, and of information. And in 2019, Donald Trump authorized the US Space Force, saying, "There is going to be a lot of things happening in space, because space is the world's newest warfighting domain." And Secretary of Defense Mark Esper added, "Maintaining American dominance in that domain is now the mission of the United States Space Force." In response, President Putin said that Russia needed to develop its own space forces further and made it clear that US expansion in space posed a threat to Russian interests. The US military is continually warning of the threats posed by Chinese and Russian ambitions in space, but they forget to mention their own desire to maintain dominance there. And maintaining military dominance does not come cheap. Government spending on space is increasing, and the US government is spending far more than anyone else. The Space Force budgetary requests for 2024 is $30.3 billion. This would be a 15% increase from the previous year and a near doubling of the budget since the first one 4 years ago. In 2020, Space Force announced a new command structure consisting of 3 commands: Space Operations Command, Space Systems Command, and Space Training and Readiness Command, under which there are units called deltas and garrisons. The deltas are responsible for specific operations, and garrisons are responsible for providing support functions to deltas. The first 11 deltas are assigned to Space Operations Command, with tasks as shown here: training, space domain awareness, electronic warfare, missile warning, command and control, cyberspace operations, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, satellite communications and navigation warfare, orbital warfare, and the two Buckley and Peterson-Schriever garrisons. It's worth looking at what some of these activities are. The aim of dominating and controlling space requires an ability to monitor everything that goes on there. This is known as space domain awareness and is the role of Space Delta II. Data is collected from a variety of space sensors and ground-based telescopes and radars and is combined with intelligence sources to produce a picture of the space environment. It enables the military to monitor the activities of others in space and can provide data for targeting of anti-satellite systems. The Fylingdales Large Phased Array Radar near me in the UK is a 1989 to 1992 Raytheon upgrade of a system originally built by RCA in 1962. It's also a part of the US Ballistic Missile Warning System, which comes under Space Delta IV. An officer of Space Delta IV is present on the base to advise on operational issues. Space Force's Space Fence is a second-generation space surveillance system located at Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall Islands. Built by Lockheed Martin at a cost of $1.6 billion, it became operational in March 2020. The Space Surveillance Network tracks about 26,000 objects, and according to a news release, the addition of the Space Fence will increase the catalogue size significantly over time. A new addition to the Space Surveillance Network will be the Deep Space Advanced Radar Capability, or DARC. In February 2022, Space Force awarded Northrop Grumman a $341 million contract to build the first DARC radar, and the whole system will consist of 3 bases located in Texas, Australia and Britain, which will be able to detect an object the size of a football up to 36,000 kilometers away. The radar will be able to detect, track, identify and characterize objects in geosynchronous orbit, where a lot of military surveillance and communication satellites are stationed. The development of hypersonic missiles, whose speed and maneuverability make them very difficult to detect and intercept, has been a recent focus. The US and China have already conducted several tests, and Russia has claimed it has used hypersonic missiles in Ukraine. There are 2 major types: the hypersonic glide vehicle, which leaves the Earth's atmosphere and then plunges back into it, and the hypersonic cruise missile, which, while not as fast, flies low and at extremely high speeds, giving opponents little time to react. So the US Missile Defense Agency is developing a constellation of hypersonic and ballistic tracking space sensor satellites to detect and intercept hypersonics as part of the next generation overhead persistent infrared satellite system. Missiles will be tracked along the satellite constellation, and information passed to the satellites equipped with more advanced sensors can then provide targeting data for interceptors. L3Harris Technologies has completed the final major design stage of the on-orbit prototype demonstration system and has already begun building the demonstration satellite. Space Force's Space War Fighting Analysis Center is responsible for conducting analysis, modelling and wargaming, and also investigating the design of missile warning, tracking and defence systems. Space Delta III is responsible for space electronic warfare. In March 2020, Space Force received its first space weapon, a ground-based satellite communications radio frequency jamming system. Disrupting satellite signals can affect the ability of the military to communicate, to command and control distributed systems, and to identify and home in on targets. Space Force will be ordering 30 of these portable upgraded systems to combat Chinese and Russian space-based technology. L3Harris received a $125 million contract for the upgrade, which could be ready in 2024. Delta 6 is developing cyber warfare techniques and support for military satellites, and a new Space-End crypto unit to help protect the network from cyber attacks, jamming and other electromagnetic interference. Northrop Grumman will work with Aeronix to build the prototype system. And Space Force also has a unit called Delta 9, established in July 2020, which is developing the secretive Boeing X-37B military spaceplane. There is also a unit called Space Delta 18, which acts as the National Space Intelligence Center to provide intelligence on threats, intentions and activities in space. It's working to establish a national test and training complex to create accurate digital training environments for space wargaming. Currently, Space Force does not have an interest in activities beyond the Earth's orbit. However, this may change, and others are already looking at the possibilities of using nuclear energy to power deep space missions, bases on the Moon and on Mars, and the mining of planetary bodies. And aerospace corporations, the nuclear industry and Space Force are looking at nuclear-powered satellites as a way of either dodging space weapons or perhaps powering them. Recently, the war in Ukraine has drawn attention to the use of commercial satellites to track troop movements and monitor the impact of attacks. The US, UK and others have pumped billions of dollars worth of arms and equipment into the Ukrainian army to keep the war going, and arms companies are filling their pockets. Last year, Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov openly offered Ukraine as a venue to test NATO weapons against Russia and as a testing ground for a US war with China. General John W. Raymond, head of space operations at US Space Force, has said that the aerospace industry has helped Kiev each and every day. Satellites, drones, artificial intelligence and cyber capabilities have been central to the war since the start, and NATO has launched a €1 billion investment fund for innovation to, I quote, help bring to life those nascent technologies that have the power to transform our security in the decades to come, end quote. And of course, Space Force has its own initiatives. Classified and commercial US satellites have provided Ukraine with intelligence on Russian troop movements, and SpaceX has delivered 15,000 Starlink satellite internet kits to Ukraine to enable citizens' internet access. However, it's also been used to target Russian positions with drones, which was breaking policies set out by SpaceX. Last February, SpaceX President Gwynne Shotwell explained that Starlink technology was never meant to be weaponized, and confirmed that while it was okay for the Ukrainian military to deploy Starlink technology for communications, the intent was never to have them use it for offensive purposes. She said the company had taken steps to limit the abilities of the Ukrainian armed forces to use Starlink in an offensive way, without giving any further details. Meanwhile, Russia has also claimed that its Tirada 2 system has found ways to disable ground-to-satellite connections as used by Starlink. Cyber attacks and signal jamming have been common activities in Ukraine, as have the development of countermeasures. The war has increased the use of drones, rockets and electronic warfare in the battlefield. A small drone fitted with modern digital optics and a secure data link can give even the smallest combat unit a view of the battlefield and the ability to see ahead, a mile or so behind enemy lines. The war in Ukraine has also been used to put missile defence back on the agenda. As previously mentioned, Russia has claimed it has successfully deployed hypersonic missiles in Ukraine, and the US has started to develop satellite networks as a defence. But why is all this particularly worrying now? Well, in May, Brigadier General Jesse Morehouse at US Space Command said that the Russian aggression and Chinese vision to become the dominant space power by mid-century had left the US with no choice but to prepare for orbital skirmishes. Morehouse said, "If someone was to threaten the United States of America or any of our interests, we're ready to fight tonight." He added, "We have a variety of capabilities we can bring to bear and will continue to develop capabilities that allow us to maintain a credible deterrence posture." So there is a real need for a halt to the space arms race. International cooperation and agreements must be achieved soon to prevent further damage to the Earth and the space environment. However, neither the spirit nor the letter of the 1967 Outer Space Treaty is being taken seriously, and space exploration has given way to exploitation. We urgently need new, up-to-date agreements. A UN open-ended working group on reducing space threats through norms, rules and principles of responsible behaviours was convened in February 2022, and the first and second sessions were held in Geneva the same year, with the third taking place last January. But not a lot of real progress has been made. Will it take too long to be meaningful? In the meantime, huge steps are being taken too quickly to further militarise and weaponise space. The international community must engage now to ensure strategies are adopted to create a sustainable future on Earth and in space. If you have been, thanks for listening.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to move now to our second speaker, Christian Sorensen from the New England area. Christian is a researcher and independent journalist, mainly focused on corporations profiting from war. He's an Air Force veteran, and he's the author of the book, Understanding the War Industry. And he's going to talk about how corporations form the backbone of space militarization. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, everyone. All right. This is just a taste. Militarization of space, a taste of the corporate backbone. Here we go. Overview. There are ground radar, keep an eye on space. There are launch sites where the launch vehicles featuring rockets and the payloads on the rockets are launched. And there are satellites. These satellites are used for espionage, communications, and targeting. As Dave talked about, Space Force has bases all over the country. These are the main ones, focused around California, Colorado, New England, and Florida. Two corporations are foundational to this whole militarization of space: the Aerospace Corporation and LinQuest. Aerospace Corporation runs the FFRDC, the federally funded research and development center that is focused on space, and that's at Los Angeles Air Force Base. LinQuest sells all kinds of stuff to Space Force and to the US Air Force: advisory and assistance, research, development, engineering. It is owned by private equity, as are increasingly more and more war corporations. So Aerospace Corporation and LinQuest. Ground radar. The military positions ground radar around the world to keep an eye on satellites, space debris, space trash, and trajectory of missiles that are launched. Our missiles and enemy missiles. Corporations run these radar sites. Right now, they include Indyne and STS, among others, Serco, which is a British corporation. But because of the nature of contracting, corporations can bid on running these sites. And so, for example, in the past, BAE Systems, based in London, with many sites in production facilities in the US, has run these radar. Launch ranges. In general, there's the Western Range and Eastern Range. Western Range focused around Vandenberg Space Force Station in California. Eastern Range focused around the east coast of Florida, Cape Canaveral, Patrick Space Force Base. Launch vehicles. In general, United Launch Alliance and SpaceX are the ones launching the payloads. United Launch Alliance is comprised of Boeing and Lockheed Martin. It's a joint venture. SpaceX, you know. Aerojet Rocketdyne supplies some of the rockets that go onto this stuff as well. And Aerojet Rocketdyne was just is in the process of being purchased by L3Harris, I believe. L3Harris is probably the number 6 top US-based war corporation. Can everybody mute themselves? By the way, I'm getting some feedback here. Thanks. Satellites. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman make most of the satellites that are focused on targeting, on military communications, and on espionage. Okay. L3Harris and Raytheon create a lot of the goods and services that go on these satellites, particularly anything that has to do with imaging. GPS is a weapon. We know it because the US government has done a good job in terms of PR, public relations, positioning this GPS as a convenient tool for navigation, and that it is. However, its primary purpose is to guide ordnance onto targets. Okay. So for example, a Lockheed Martin Hellfire missile made in Orlando, Florida, right outside of Universal Studios, or a General Dynamics bomb made in Garland, Texas, fitted with a Boeing JDAM kit made in St. Louis, Missouri. This ordnance is released by a drone, typically General Atomics Reaper made in Poway, California, or a piloted aircraft made by Boeing or Lockheed Martin. This ordnance is guided on target by Lockheed Martin GPS satellite, which was launched by United Launch Alliance. That's Boeing and Lockheed Martin, as we know, or launched by SpaceX. Supported by corporate contractors up the wazoo, they're sitting over at Los Angeles Air Force Base. As Dave alluded to or talked about, the counter communication system. This is an L3Harris product. Shuts down another country's satellite connection, basically jams the satellite. It is marketed as being temporary and reversible. It is a weapon of war. There are 16 currently in service. The US military has ordered many more, and they're positioned around the world in order to wage warfare against other countries' space infrastructure. L3Harris product. Beware of euphemism. Corporations and the US military will say, oh, we're just engaging stakeholders. No, this is capitalists networking with capitalists. They are the 1%. They don't care about you. They don't care about the working class, let alone the poor. They'll say, oh, it's a solution. We here at War Corporation sell solutions to government. No, it is a product of war or a product of espionage. And it's used against you, the workers of the world. They'll say it's a surgical strike. It's surgical. Surgical strike. No, it is a missile attack or it is a bombing, and it kills people. They'll say their new favorite is kinetic. It's kinetic. Kinetic. No, you are killing people or you're blowing up infrastructure. We, the people, must avoid these terms. We must call them out. And these terms are numerous. This is just a taste. We must call them out and avoid using them. How might a healthy society use this space infrastructure? Well, we have a climate crisis going on, as well as the 6th mass extinction, according to scientists. Now, maybe we'll use these satellites in the industrial capacity for national, oceanic, and atmospheric administration, monitor weather and climate, or NASA exploring the cosmos, okay? Or the civilian ground facilities, tracking space junk. It's getting awfully crowded up there. Or for planetary defense. We know, scientists tell us, that asteroids, large and small, coming our way, and there are near misses that happen all the time. It would be wise for us as a species to put some effort into this instead of the militarization of space. Thank you for your time. Look forward to your questions down the road.
Thank you very much, Christian. Very well done. Hang on 1 second, everybody, please. Okay. Next, we're going to hear from Jaeyoon Ri, who is Korean American. She's a member of the New York-based Notadol for Korean Community Development Organization. She's a board member of the Korean Policy Institute, and her subject is U.S. NATO expansion into the Asia Pacific. Welcome, Joanne.
Thank you, Bruce. Hello, everyone. You all see my screen now? Nope. Okay. So, well, the NATO was created in 1949 for the purpose of collective defense and what's called the collective security against the threat from the Soviet Union. As we all know that NATO is a military alliance, and the military alliance alleges an enemy or the war or military conflicts with that enemy, the enemy being at the time the Soviet Union and its bloc. Military alliance accordingly cannot be peacekeeping mechanism. It is a military machinery. And in that sense, we can see how absurd when the NATO has transformed its main role in collective security to include what's now called humanitarian interventions. This humanitarian phrase is an excuse and justification for NATO military interventions and its intrusion on state sovereignty. Yes, the US and NATO propagandize that their actions are humanitarian, peacekeeping, and protecting freedom, but we do see that it's always involving imperialist world order, Western dominance, capitalism, and US economic hegemony. Probably Kishida in Japan and Yoon in Korea would not even believe that rhetoric anymore. Recently, there was a lot of buzz about NATO's eastward expansion into East Asia since the pivot to Asia started under Obama administration. Since it is a military alliance, it requires an enemy. This is where China comes in East Asia. Without an enemy, and impending threats, a strong military alliance would not be sustained. As you saw how the US sometimes downplays North Korean technologies and its missile capabilities, and sometimes much exaggerates in accordance with its own circumstances and interests. The threat of the enemy varies and fluctuates as well. So the true security cannot be obtained or sustained by alliances. In South Korea and Japan's case, military alliances are have inevitably been complicated by subjugation into world economy, dependent and unfair trades, and political corruption. NATO is more than a military alliance, and it is an imperialist advancement in multipolar world system. So here on the screen, you will see how the China has been the targeting in the very most recent NATO summit, and Japan has been invited as the closest partner. And that has been covered also in Japan and Korea as an achievement of the government, of course. Yet it's not that a rosy picture that the government can only draw. So wait, I lost my place. Hold on 1 second, sorry. So it is not surprising that US is trying to bring in Japan and South Korea into NATO. Japan has long been a US ally. the war in Ukraine has taken so many casualties and losses. I am not certain how much we can trust the numbers from all of this sensationalized public media. However, this number is still devastating. In the US, many US people are not really keeping up with the war in Ukraine. People in the US are such insensitized about wars somewhere else and being insulated between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. It is always a war over there, not here, as Congressman Lindsey Graham said about a possible war on the Korean Peninsula. I am sure the people in the audience is trying to stop the military actions in Ukraine and will hopefully do something about a war in East Asia. Okay, so while I admit that NATO's tenuous attempt for eastward expansion is no news to many of you now, but the consequences may be much more destructive and detrimental than we could imagine. And from a Korean American point of view, I want to share my reasons for these heightened concerns. The first of all, many of you would know this, but South Korea's military control sometimes, especially at wartime, is not in the hands of Koreans. It is with a US 4-star general, Paul LaCamera, who is a commander of 3 commands: the UN Command, the US ROK Combined Forces Command, and US Forces in Korea Command, United Nations Command. UNC was established on July 24, 1950, and its role is to monitor the adherence to the armistice. However, the US is not a neutral third-party state. As you know, US fought against North Korea in the Korean War. Why would you put a military general of an involved party to the monitoring the armistice? The numerous violations of armistice itself have never become an issue, as US is on the side of the violations. The Combined Forces Agreement, Combined Forces Command controls the ROK military. In order to make sure the chain of command is operational, the US and ROK military have to conduct multiple military exercises a year. Because of this, you can call South Korea as a sort of deformed sovereign state. US has the control over the South Korean military. The US forces in Korea is the US forces that stays in South Korea, which belongs to the 8th Field Army, and about 28,500 service personnel. By the way, about 53,800 US troops are stationed in Japan. So if you look at this Al Jazeera chart, which has the data from the 2020, you can see that US has about 750 bases in at least 80 countries. Almost half of the overseas troops are concentrated in ROK and Japan, if you see these graphs. ROK has the 6th world largest military. And the first is China. If we consider this dense population in East Asia, it can be estimated the number of casualties if a war occurs will be the highest ever. At the same time, nuclear threats and military tensions are increasingly escalated as the territorial disputes in the South China Sea have been intensified. This pumped up tension is in and of itself a strong show-off against not only China, but also North Korea. Most recently, 2 days ago, USFK webpage issued a press release about the US strategic bombers are in South Korean territory. If you look at this screen, then you will also see that it is not only July, 3 days ago, but also in March, April, June, US conducted a joint military exercises with involving the B-52H bombers with the South Korean Army. South Korean Air Forces. Not only the space, but also in the sea. The nuclear capable machineries are coming back to South Korean waters since first time since 1980s. What is alarming in this region is the nuclear race is real and palpable. The next slide, I'll show you that there has been already a warning about July 9, 2023 from the North. And the North Korea conducted another ICBM missile launch. And then South Korea has declared that it's going to have its plan called the Project 425, which is involving the reconnaissance satellite race among that. So this is race in the space and this involving with the satellites, surveillance and spy satellites are real, and it's going to be rampant in between the Japan, North Korea, and China and South Korea. The area is highly volatile right now at this point. I would say that NATO expansion in East Asia is not proceeding without much resistance from people. The Yoon administration may appear to be eager to stand along with the US agenda, but peace activists, workers and reunification activists are protesting, and the Yoon's administration's feeble attempt to willingly and meekly go along with the US demands and agenda. The Yoon administration's approval rating is going down even further at this point, and many are doing their best to stop ROK, the Republic of Korea administration, to join the NATO. With the NATO's eastwards expansion and the US's continued hegemony, we have no peace and we have no hope in the region. In that sense, global network against the weapons and nuclear power in space, and its activities are really important and relevant. I also think that people in the US it's our responsibility to stop our own government to cause so much death and harm all around the world. We are one in our own struggle, and we hope to continue and win. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian. Very well done. We're now going to go to Lisa Savage, who is a person who lives here in Maine. Lisa is a retired educator, organizer, and past candidate for the US Senate in 2020 against Susan Collins. She's currently the social media coordinator for the Global Network on a part-time basis. We're happy to have her. She's going to speak about declining empire chases fading dream of full spectrum dominance.
Thanks. Sorry about the unmuting problem. I'm really honored to be here with this group of not only presenters, but the audience. It's exciting to me to be part of an international group of thinkers and wise, compassionate thinkers who are paying attention and aren't afraid to speak up. So thank you so much for including me. My first slide shows I created to convey my idea that full spectrum dominance is an oxymoron. Full spectrum is a mostly positive sounding phrase that implies, rainbows and all the colors and the full light spectrum, whereas dominance is obviously a very militarized, very violent kind of word. It's deliciously ironic in the year 2023 because, of course, the U.S., who has conceived of full spectrum dominance, is slipping further from it with every second these days. In some ways, full spectrum dominance reflects the tendency of the U.S. to treat allies like vassals. A strategy in part supported by educating ambitious young people in the U.S. versus the universities, fellowships, and the like. We've seen a lot of this in the European so-called leadership during the Ukraine war, the present phase. We also, I think, the exploitation of indigenous peoples' homelands and around the globe is a precursor, a ramp up to full spectrum dominance. This country, the United States, was founded on such exploitation. The ascendance of finance over manufacturing or farming and the commodification of what were formerly commons that supported life, I also see as full spectrum dominance enablers. And obviously our 800 plus military bases outside the US are major projects of full spectrum dominance. The petrodollar quickly fading from the scene, also a big part. Just as we were starting this conference, I saw that Edward Snowden tweeted something interesting. He said, achieving totalitarian control by invisibly exploiting the public's dependence on essential technologies. And then he has -- tech-talitarianism. So that's an interesting coinage that maybe is also part of what we think of when we talk about full spectrum dominance. The Pentagon stated policy from 1997 onward about full spectrum dominance, in my mind, was military. That when I first, heard it, I conceived of it as military. In 2015, this infographic showed what they were not had already achieved, but were trying to achieve. By the time Space Force was created during the Trump administration, their motto, Sempra Supra, always above, clearly has overtones of the full spectrum dominance idea. I'm going to argue that to zoom forward to now, the information realm is increasingly important in full spectrum dominance. Here I'm showing a recent news report from Politico, which is considered a very Democratic Party aligned beltway, Washington, D.C. beltway. And it's a part about how Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, saying, well, we're sending cluster munitions, not because we want to, but it's kind of all we have left on the shelves right now, which is a pretty weird admission. But the reason that I'm sharing this is that I wanted to point out that this publication, the National Security Daily by Politico, is sponsored by Lockheed Martin, which makes untold millions and billions off of the US taxpayer funding such things. And if you read their little sponsorship message, they clearly see this as going beyond conventional military hardware, but they will be connecting, in other words, working in the information and cyberspace realms to help their customers stay ahead of emerging threats. We all know what those euphemisms are about. I also see the recent Twitter files as part of the evidence for full spectrum dominance, because what has been revealed so far is that government officials constantly pressured Twitter managers to censor unwelcome views, even if those views were factually correct. Some of it was in the health realm about vaccines, but it very often has been used recently in narrative control about the Ukraine war. And so even things that are truthful and correct. There is evidence internally that Twitter hears from many, many government agencies. So my tax dollars are paying some government employees to contact social media platforms such as Twitter and say, we don't like that Bruce Gagnon. We don't like what he's saying. We want you to, use the algorithm to bump him down. So you don't really have to cancel Bruce's account. You just make sure that not very many people see it. This is the 21st century version of censorship that we're seeing. You're probably aware, may be aware that a judge recently ruled like, you got to stop doing that. That is not okay. You cannot work with social media companies and tell them what First Amendment rights shall be permitted by the US public. During the recent unrest in France, the government turned off the internet for a little while because they didn't, they wanted to control the flow of information. So certainly this is an ongoing struggle, and Twitter is not the only social media platform doing this, but it's a good example thereof. We have here the violent war walrus, John Bolton, with sort of the quintessential full spectrum dominance mindset, I think. And one of the things that I noticed while I was preparing for this is Diana Johnstone wrote an article some years ago, but she quoted from the meeting at the end of World War II after the atomic bombs had been dropped on Japan, where Harry Truman, the president at the time, basically said, now we can get away with anything. So I think the mindset of your John Boltons and Pentagon thinkers is we have the ultimate weapon, nuclear weapons, and we've shown we're not afraid to use them. So everybody else, get back. Of course, again, in the 21st century, many other nations have nuclear weapons and possibly more effective and harder to defend against than the US. But the US is not going to give up this hubristic point of view easily. I think that a few deranged individuals want to push full spectrum dominance all the way to the US using nuclear weapons. And we can agitate against it. I always pray that the hackers and computer specialists far smarter than I am are working hard on jamming up the ability to use these very communications based and interconnected systems. I'm going to show you, this is one graphic that says full spectrum dominance. Many of us mentioned about the jamming devices, so I won't dwell on this, but note that it's 2 years behind schedule. So the Pentagon likes to beat its chest and act real, we dominate everything, but they actually have a bad model, I think. Using capitalism to build the kind of things they need is really not as effective as a sort of coordinated self-defense program such as Russia or China seem to have for developing state-of-the-art tools that they need. We've recently seen reports that Russian hackers got into the Ukrainian, conscription database and messed with it. So that's also an interesting approach. And we also see back and forth, Russian military is offline because they've been hacked. So it's ongoing. This slide to me shows that the hegemon days are done, and it's a new world with multipolar, representation of many nations coming together to cooperate and collaborate, and having one imperial power that vassalizes anybody that wants to be on their team. That ship has sailed. Whether the US will recognize it or admit it is another question, but that's kind of where we are right now. This slide is from a children's book that I read to my grandson last night. It was published in 2011. It's published by Scholastic, a big corporate American school, pre-K through probably 8th grade publisher. This is how they depict without spiders, insects could take over the world, is an insect sitting in front of the seal of the president of the United States, flanked by 2 flags. So this kind of soft propaganda starts early and often. I could do an hour on just this publishing corporation and their propaganda efforts on this is like a little kid book, preschool book. But that's the way that full spectrum dominance works, is you get into every sector you can in as many ways as you can. As we all know, BRICS is really on the rise as an economic alternative to being a US vassal, with 42% of the world's population. That's right now before they admit the many, many nations that have applied to be part of this economic cooperative. So I think, the history has shifted away from full spectrum dominance. It never was more than a pipe dream. It's increasingly fantastic that anyone could believe it's still possible, but here we are. So what do we do about it? Oh, sorry. That was my timer. I ran out of 10 minutes. We have to organize. People online are loving the fact that the killer whales or orcas have been attacking yachts and taking out the rudder and teaching each other how to do that. So I'm seeing a lot of social media, graphics and jokes such as this one, but it really, really is true. Andrew, I'll end with a quote from Andrew Bacevich, who's the president of Quincy Institute and someone from inside the Beltway who seems to still have his head on straight. The monumental arrogance and ignorance prevailing in the inner circles of power have led Americans to misapprehend their place in the global order. We who organize, I think, know our place in the global order, and that is to communicate with each other, listen, work together, collaborate, and cooperate rather than trying to dominate. So it's all hands on deck, and I'm proud to be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Great job. I love that last slide. Organize. That's brilliant. Next, we're going to hear from our friend Ray McGovern, who lives in North Carolina these days. He served as a CIA analyst for 27 years. He chaired the National Intelligence Estimates and prepared the President's Daily Brief. His subject will be U.S. missile bases in Poland and Romania, Cuban Missile Crisis in Reverse. Please welcome Ray McGovern.
Can you hear me okay? You can. Good. Well, I'm privileged to be with you all. I've already learned a lot. And what I'm going to try to do is go through some slides that I prepared and that illustrate this thing in a kind of a nice, easy way to understand. The only trouble is that I'm going to have to go through them very quickly to meet the 10-minute requirement, and I've set my stopwatch here. First off, let's realize that after the ABM Treaty, which was abrogated by George W. Bush, and after the INF Treaty was abrogated, the Russians really felt like, why did they do this? And they got no answer. Now, as early as 2016, Putin talked to Western reporters, and he was incredibly frank. And he told us, he told them that, look, these missiles that you've put in Romania, these missiles you put in Poland, we don't know what's in those capsules. They could be cruise missiles. When you get hypersonic missiles, they could be hypersonic missiles. So we don't know what's there. This is a threat to us. Next slide, please. Now he's talking about how quickly, if these are ABM missile sites as advertised, how quickly they could be transformed into shooting, firing cruise missiles or worse. And the answer is like an hour to stick a new disk into the computer and convert it to the program that would enable cruise missiles. So is Putin telling these people way back in 2016 that this is possible? Yes, he is. He's talking about Romania. Do you think the Romanians would even know about this? No. What are we in? We're in grave danger. Next slide, please. Okay, So it's extremely alarming. Now, this is what, this is 5 years later, okay? This is the end of 2021, just 2 months before the invasion of Ukraine. And what I'm saying here is this is one of the main reasons for the invasion of Ukraine. Not the only reason. Even more important was the preparedness of the Ukrainian military to invade Donbass in late February, early March 2022. So what we have here is MK-41 launchers. That's the right designation. It's openly available. He's telling his chief military that if they're deployed in Ukraine, whoa, their flight time to Moscow would be 7 to 10 minutes, okay? 5 minutes if hypersonic systems. Next slide, please. Okay, now he comes back after the speeches are over. I want to add a few words. Remember, unlike Yugoslavia, Iraq, Syria, this is on our doorstep, okay? We simply have nowhere to retreat. His words, they will supply hypersonic missiles to Ukraine. Bear in mind the date there, December 21st, 21. 9 days later, next slide, please. Whoa, 9 days later, at Putin's insistence, Biden talks to him by telephone. What's the readout? President Biden emphasized that Russia and US share a special responsibility for ensuring stability in Europe, quote, and that Washington has no intention of deploying offensive ballistic or offensive strike missile weapons in Ukraine. Whoa! Geneva talks are going to begin on the 9th and 10th of January. What a terrific, next slide, please. What a terrific, oh, that was euphoria among Putin's major advisors. Ushakov, which is the main guy, he said, oh, this is great. Okay. They had a great New Year's Eve celebration, okay? Non-deployment of offensive missiles, says Ushakov, satisfies and acknowledges Russians' security concerns. Whoa, okay, next slide, please. That was December 31st. Oh, February 12th. Next time Biden and Putin talk, Biden had been told to forget about it. Did you really promise that? Did you really make that undertaking to Putin on December 30th? Well, Joe, forget about it. And so U.S. negotiators forgot about it. And the Russians complained there was no, I'd like to note straight away, says Putin, okay, that there was no talks about non-deployment of strike weapon systems on Ukrainian territory. Next slide, please. Okay, now here's the comparison with Cuba, okay? Or here at least is how Ted Postal, who helped me greatly on these things, Chief Naval Advisor to the Chief of Naval Operations, a Professor Emeritus in Physics at MIT. Ted's got credentials that won't quit, okay? He helped me on this. I said, Ted, create a generic ballistic missile, a time path from the current existing sites in Romania and Poland, say to Moscow, okay? Oh, what you got? This is today, all right? Well, from the one in Romania, which is the farthest away, about 10 minutes. From the one in Poland, 9.3 minutes. From the one that could be positioned around Kiev, since the US reneged on that promise, I want to say 7 minutes, okay? So what we're talking about is a real threat as Putin sees it. Next slide, please. Oh, this is what they look like. Just to give you an example, this comes from the Aegis on-ship system. That's the capsule. They fit it in. Next slide, please. Okay, as you can see, the capsule, the standard capsule is that top line there, okay? You can't tell whether it's a Tomahawk, as Putin calls it, a Tomahawk cruise missile, or a anti-submarine missile, or a SAM, surface-to-air missiles. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are the little. They look like a pillbox, right? Like I use in the morning, so I don't get my pills mixed up. Okay, you can't see underneath what's in a pillbox. Next slide, please. That's what they look in the ship. There's a diagram. Next slide, please. This is a model of how they look in Romania. Okay, they're above ground. There's no digging necessary. They're all set, and as you can see from the top there, you can't tell what's in there. All right. So that's what the Russians are seeing. And there's no disguising it, no attempt to disguise it. And that's what's in Romania now and in Poland. Next slide, please. Okay, well, that's what they look. There's the Tomahawk on the left. There's a anti-aircraft interceptor on the right. They come out of the same pillbox holder. You can't tell which one is in there. Next one, please. Well, this just shows that the State Department says, oh, no, they can't be converted. They can't be converted. It took a long time. Well, that's BS, okay? Ted Postal and others tell me that would take a half an hour to put a new, now we say floppy disk. You put a new CD in there. You don't even need a DVD, and you got a cruise missile, or when they get them, when the US gets hypersonic missiles which can reach Moscow in from 5 to 7 minutes, according to Vladimir Putin. Next slide, please. Okay, here's the Cuban analogy. I got 2 minutes left. All right, look at that middle circle, all right? That's for an SS-4 medium range ballistic missile. That's what they could hit when they were already in place in Cuba with nuclear warheads, okay? So that middle circle is what I draw attention to. The smaller circle has to do with bombers that could reach that kind of radius. Next slide, please. Oh, wow, what's this? Those are the rather crude by today's standards photos, images that show what was in Cuba. Now, we'd had so many pictures of SS-4 sites in Russia that the only thing missing from this one was a big placard that says, "Here lies an SS-4 site." You know, hello. So, point is, we knew exactly what was there. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so what did we do? Well, what did Obama say about all this? Well, he said, don't do stupid stuff. Okay, let's be clear. This is a core interest for Moscow. It ain't a core interest for us, and we ought to be able to figure out what it's worth going to war for. Whoa, okay. Now, he resisted sending arms to Ukraine. Guess why? Because this would encourage the Ukrainians to think that they could actually defeat the far more powerful Russians. It was a no-brainer. You look at the map, for God's sake, and you can see, oh, wait a second, a late bulletin here. Oh, wait a second. President of the United States said 2 years ago that Russia has already lost in Ukraine. Cancel all my, hello, a parallel universe here. Now, this is dangerous. So just to sum up here, I got 1 more minute. I'm comparing the situation that John Kennedy faced with when Khrushchev put ballistic missiles of medium range in Cuba with what Putin sees going into Romania, Poland, and he thought Ukraine was prohibited, but Biden and, well, anyhow, it's not going to go into Ukraine now. So what am I saying? I said, well, as Obama warned, we're talking about core interests here, right? Okay. Now, it was a core interest to Kennedy and those generals looking over his shoulder that this be removed, okay, that this threat be faced and removed. Did he do illegal things to achieve it? Quarantines, what he called it. It was a blockade, illegal. Threatening nuclear war is frowned upon by the UN. Amassing an invasion force right next to Cuba, no, that was sort of frowned. So he did a legal thing because there was a core interest, because he faced an existential threat. Now, what's the good news? Khrushchev backed down. Okay, so today, if Putin faces an existential threat, he's going to do what's necessary, and he has the wherewithal to do that. Will Joe Biden back down? That's what we have to make sure happens, guys. And I'm just privileged once again to be with you all. I hope I didn't run through this too quickly. I will put the lecture from which this comes in the chat.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you very much. For well done. I just want to mention where I live here in Mid-Coast, Maine, at Bath Iron Works, they're building these Navy Aegis destroyers outfitted with these very systems that Ray just talked about. Currently, they're working on 7 of these ships that are being sent to encircle both Russia and China in the waters around those 2 countries. They call the platforms in Romania and Poland that Ray has just so well described, Aegis ashore. So they took the platform off the ship and they put them on the ground. Crazy, crazy stuff. Our final speaker is our board member from Canada, Tamara Lorenz. She's a PhD candidate at the university. I can't read this, it's so light. Tamara, you're gonna have to tell where you're a PhD candidate at. She's a member of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. And her topic is censorship, how NATO, national intelligence services, and universities coordinate and weaponize information. So welcome, Tamara.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to the Global Network for organizing this meeting and bringing us all together. It's really nice to be with you all. I'm going to share my slides now. I am going to add to what Lisa said and provide a little bit more detail on the latest developments in information warfare. The wars that the US and NATO conduct from outer space using satellites are also wars that they conduct in the information space. A few years ago, imprisoned WikiLeaks journalist Julian Assange said that all wars start with media lies. Western governments use the media to control information about their wars to maintain public support. This is not new. We have known for decades that the US government and the Central Intelligence Agency have been able to control news outlets and journalists domestically and internationally through the revelations of the Church Committee hearings in the late 1970s and the exposure of the CIA's Operation Mockingbird. And then later, through the CIA's National Endowment for Democracy, funding journalists worldwide from the 1980s to today. In their 1988 book, Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of Mass Media, Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky wrote, "In a world of concentrated wealth and major conflicts of class interest, to fulfill this role requires systematic propaganda." Herman and Chomsky were dealing with conventional media, television, radio, and print, but mass media has evolved, as you all know, with the emergence of social media 20 years ago. In 2004, Facebook came out. Then in 2006, there was YouTube, Twitter, and WikiLeaks. And in 2010, Instagram. People started to use these platforms to share their stories and read alternative information not available in conventional media spaces. This was a big problem, of course, for Western governments. They lost their ability to control the narrative and shape public opinion. So they looked for ways to manage content on social media. Over the past decade, Western governments with their national intelligence services in coordination with NATO and pro-NATO think tanks and academics have been coordinating to control and censor information in a really insidious way. It was fully deployed for this NATO war in Ukraine. Chomsky recently called the propaganda system today to be unprecedented in his lifetime, and that's over 90 years. American journalists Matt Taibbi and Michael Shellenberger call it the censorship industrial complex. Last November, after Elon Musk bought Twitter, he opened up the company's records to Taibbi and Shellenberger. They found that the CIA, the Department of Homeland Security, and the FBI had infiltrated Twitter and other social media companies and have been managing their content. On March 9th of this year, Taibbi and Shellenberger were invited to testify at a congressional hearing on the weaponization of the federal government. In their testimony, the journalists explained that in their Twitter files reporting, how it revealed that the US intelligence and security agencies had pressured social media companies to kick people off their platforms, to amplify some accounts that were friendly to the government, and to de-amplify other accounts that were critical. In his testimony, Shellenberger stated, the Stanford Internet Observatory, the University of Washington, the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, and Graphica have all inadequately disclosed their ties to the Department of Defense, the CIA, and other intelligence services. They work with multiple US government agencies to institutionalize censorship research and advocacy within dozens of other universities and think tanks. Through the Twitter files, Taibbi also identified the role of the US State Department's Global Engagement Center as a key driver of the censorship industrial complex. The GEC was started by the Obama administration in 2011. The GEC was established within the Department of State, and its mission is to recognize and counter foreign state and non-state propaganda and disinformation efforts aimed at undermining or influencing the policy, security, or stability of the United States, its allies, and partner nations. The GEC is the central node of the censorship industrial complex and this information war. And this whole disinformation project was a topic of discussion at the NATO summit in Vilnius last week. I didn't understand the extent and problem of the censorship industrial complex until this spring, and let me tell you what happened to me in Canada. In March of this year, a report came out in Canada called, quote, "The Enemy of My Enemy, Russian Weaponization of Canada's Far Right and Far Left to Undermine Support to Ukraine." It was jointly done by the University of Regina, the University of Toronto's Digital Public Square, and the University of Maryland. This report claims that Russian bots are spreading disinformation and targeting Canadians on Twitter. It's important to understand what disinformation means. It is defined as verifiably false or misleading information that is created, presented, and disseminated to intentionally deceive the public and may cause harm. It is a threat to democracy and security. In this report, the authors say that Russia is using Twitter to promote these false narratives, disinformation in Canada, and this is being circulated by other Canadians on social media. Examples of these disinformation claims are NATO is responsible for the war. Ukraine is corrupt. Ukraine is corrupt and doesn't deserve our support. If Canadians want to cooperate with Russia on climate and Arctic issues, then we must return to democracy. Yet we all know that there is some truth to these claims. NATO does share responsibility for this tragic war in Ukraine. This Enemy of My Enemy report got widely circulated in the media in Canada and even in the United States, and it was a feature story in the New York Times. But this coverage failed to point out that the main funders for this report were Canada's Department of National Defense and the US Department of Defense's Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. As well, one of the co-authors of the report, Marcus Kolga, set up a program called Disinfo Watch in Ottawa. And this is funded by the US Embassy in Canada, NATO Strategic Communications, and the US Global Engagement Center. The following month in April, at my affiliated university, the University of Waterloo, there was a conference that was held called The Weaponization of Disinformation in Canada. And this conference was attended by academics across the country, government officials, CSIS, and representatives of think tanks, including Marcus Kolga. At the conference, there was no debate about the issues, just presentations about how Russia, China, and Iran were spreading disinformation on social media. I found it shocking that academics were making decisions about what is and is not false information without doing any robust research or having any open debate. There was also no critical inquiry. After this conference, I became really worried and I started to investigate further. I discovered that in 2019, Canada's Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, established an academic outreach and stakeholder engagement program. CSIS is the Canadian equivalent to the US CIA, and it is the Canadian connection to the Five Eyes Alliance with the US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Over the past 10 years, CSIS has been holding these workshops with academics on different topics. In 2018, CSIS held a workshop, Who Said What? The Security Challenges of Modern Disinformation. Most of the topics were related to Russia, China, and Iran. However, CSIS does not reveal the names of the professors who have been attending these workshops. Through this program, CSIS has been trying to influence academic discourse, and in my opinion, this largely explains why there has been a strange silencing at Canadian universities about this war in Ukraine, and why few professors are challenging Canada's and NATO's role in this war, and why they are not speaking out publicly and calling for peace. This disinformation project in Canada and American universities is part of the censorship industrial complex. Without research or critical debate, they are illegitimately determining what is acceptable information, and they are complicit in this information war. Western governments have built a well-coordinated international network to control public discourse on social media, and the universities to maintain their support and to support for their wars and to suppress dissent. Finally, Taibbi and Schellenberger are calling for the censorship industrial complex to be dismantled. I believe it begins with exposing it, having the courage to call it out, use social media, be on the streets, and spread our information about the threat that NATO poses to promote peace, to end this war in Ukraine, and to cooperate with Russia, China, and Iran. I would like to give you two quick. I want to end with this quote by Julian Assange. Every day, ordinary people teach us that democracy is free speech and dissent, for true democracy is the sum of our resistance. And I'd like to show you quickly 2 slides of my little acts of resistance. Outside of my office door at the university, I have these signs: stop the war, stop NATO, stop the weapons, and let's stop the hostility and war, and try peace and friendship with Russia, China, and climate action for peace. And also with my sign at the university, stop the war, stop lying, stop NATO. And in closing, I want to encourage you to watch this really important speech that Matt Taibbi gave at Princeton University on April 25th. And it's available on Rumble and on YouTube still. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tamara. Really well done. Thanks to all of our speakers. I'm sorry that we couldn't give you each 20, 30 minutes, but anyway, I think you really got your message very well stated. I want to just add one item that's coming up in October. Our annual Keep Space for Peace Week will be October 7 through the 14th. Every year we ask people all over the world to organize some kind of activities during that week. Even if you just go to our website and look in our resource section at our videos and share some of those videos on your email or on your Facebook page or whatever else, anything you can do during that time would be really helpful so that we get people to really understand what's happening. Our theme this year is going to be crowded orbits, which I referred to earlier. The debris, the chance of cascading collisions in space, knocking out, imagine GPS, cell phone, internet banking, you name it. Everything that's hooked up to satellites in this cascading Kessler syndrome would be destroyed. So keep space for Peace Week. There'll be more information about that soon. We're now, Dave, if you're ready, going to go to Tom Nielsen's song, Elon's Gone to Mars.
Elon Musk is gone to Mars. Get some lithium for cars. Just another cake to bake. Back to lunch that he could take. Elon wants to take control of the universal whole. Wants some better candy bars, so Elon's gone to Mars. The Mars Society says there's profitability from gold and maybe oil if there's dinosaurs in their soil. They say the rotten earth is dying and Mars is good for trying. Take along his bong cigars, Elon's gone to Mars. Detonate 10,000 nuclear bombs on 1,000 starships with no qualms. Terraform with CO2, turn the red planet green and blue. Drill and spill like Kalamazoo with his SpaceX ingenue.
Elon, off he's gone to drop the bomb.
Elon says he'll do a coup anywhere he wants to do. Like he did in Bolivia, now he's extraplanetary, intergalactic operations for colonial corporations. I know it's a bit bizarre, but Elon's gone to Mars. Detonate 10,000 nuclear bombs on 1,000 starships with no qualms. Not to worry about radiation when there's billionairization. Just wants to heat up outer space so he can go and own the place. Elon wants to own a place, own his place in outer space. Packing out to catch his flight, taking the red-eye overnight. Jeff Bezos going to for a low-wage rendezvous, planning military bases for those Martian marketplaces, playing sci-fi in the stars. Elon's gone to Mars. What planet is Elon on? He's already there before he's gone. 6 extinctions are addressed, leaving Earthlings in distress. Planet is sending an SOS. He could have helped clean up the mess. Planning billionaire bazaars, Elon's gone to Mars. Maybe you can come along. What could possibly go wrong? Playing sci-fi in the stars, Elon's gone to Mars.
Okay, now we're going to move towards questions. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. But first, I want to call on our newest advisory board member, Bill Astor from Massachusetts, a retired lieutenant colonel. I want to ask him if he would briefly make comments on some of the things he's heard so far, and then we'll begin to deal with the questions. Bill, you ready?
Yes, I am, Bruce. Well, thanks everyone. I'm new to this group, but in a way, this is almost a nostalgic trip down memory lane for me, because my first assignment in the Air Force in 1985 was to the Space Surveillance Center in Cheyenne Mountain as a young lieutenant. And the role of the Space Surveillance Center is to keep track of all the objects orbiting the Earth, using the sort of sensors that you all have already talked about in some of your presentations. At that time, the contractor running things was Ford Aerospace. They were underbid by BAE Systems, if I recall. So we had a contractor turnover there. I also worked with the MITRE Corporation, which is one of those federally funded research and development corporations. So I've been in Cheyenne Mountain. I've been in the Space Surveillance Center, and I actually one of the things I did as a lieutenant was to support anti-satellite testing, ASAT, launched from an F-15 Eagle fighter jet. That test did not go forward. But believe it or not, in the 1980s, I think we Americans, even under Ronald Reagan in the Star Wars era, SDI, had a little bit more sense that war in space was an awful thing. It was going to be counterproductive to United States national security interests. We, as all of you know, probably all of you, we rely on space. Space, our assets in space, and forgive me if I occasionally slip into military talk, our assets in space help us to keep the peace. The DSP system of satellites that detect missile launches by their infrared signatures, our surveillance satellites, those aren't necessarily bad things. I think you could make a solid argument that they help to keep the peace during the Cold War by reassuring both the United States and the Soviet Union that we weren't about to launch nuclear missiles against each other in some sort of a strange Lovian scenario. But times have changed, and in reflecting upon my military service, 20 years in the Air Force and now almost 20 years afterwards, what horrifies me is the extent to which space now is being militarized, and the extent to which our vision of space is no longer that of, say, a Star Trek scenario where we are the Federation embarked on a 5-year mission to explore a strange new world, and we go out and meet hostile alien species like the Klingons. I think you could make a very good argument. We are the Klingons. We are the ones who are the militarists, the ones that want to dominate. Certainly, that appears to be the case when you look at the vast increases in the Space Force budget. Of course, when I was in the military, the Space Force was part of the Air Force. It was our imperious leader, Donald Trump, who created a separate Space Force. And now there's even more budgetary pressure on that Space Force to justify its existence. And the way to justify your existence in the Pentagon, as all of you know, is to create enemies, whether they exist or not, either create them or exaggerate the threat from them, and then say that we have to deter those enemies. So now we are exaggerating, I think, the extent to which China and Russia are threats in space, and therefore, our Space Force, which is of course a benevolent Space Force, you may have noticed that the Space Force symbol very much resembles the Star Trek symbol used in the Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock series. That is not an accident. That is intentional. So we are supposedly the good guys in space, and most people accept this. Most Americans, anyway. I know. For all of you assembled here, you know better than this. But how to cut through all this, how to cut through all the propaganda to counter the information warfare is a very difficult thing, because mainstream media is obviously controlled by corporations. You're dealing with the Mickey Bat, which I think is a Ray McGovern term that he knows far better than me. The military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academic think tanks. I mean, you have over $1 trillion being spent each year, and what we have is 50 or 60 dedicated people, most of us graying. I just turned 60 the other day. And so we're up against a lot. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to lose. But sadly, I attended my first space conference back in 1985 in Colorado Springs. I can't remember if you were there, Bruce. I know there was someone there, last name of, I think it's Pike. And he was one of the few civilians brought in to lend a little bit of sanity to the proceedings. But for the most part, you know, within the US military, the vision is always one of dominance, but yet it'll always be framed in terms of deterrence and prudence and all the rest. So I didn't have any prepared remarks. I just signed up recently, and coincidentally, you guys had this meeting. I didn't even know about it. So, but I've learned a lot, and I appreciate the opportunity. If anyone has any questions, yeah, I was an insider for a few years. In fact, I wrote the chapter on exploring space for the textbook used at the Air Force Academy for all the cadets going through there who take their first astronautics class.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill, very much. And we welcome you to the Global Network. I'm glad that so soon after you came on with us, we had this chance for you to meet people. We have a couple questions. Ann Wright would like to give some feedback on a July 7th meeting, a women's meeting against NATO. So Ann, if you want to unmute yourself briefly, please.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce, and to all the folks that are listening. And yes, I was part of the Global Women, Global Women for Peace United Against NATO, which was held in Brussels over this last weekend. And remarkably, we were able to get a meeting with a senior NATO official. And so 10 of us trucked out to outside of Brussels to meet. And the head of public engagement met with us, Mr. Nicolas de Santos, and gave us 20 minutes of how great NATO is, even though he knew our background and he knew where we were coming from, but he felt it was important, I guess, to give us his positive history of NATO. Well, then all hell broke loose because each one of the 10 women had 2 minutes to respond to Mr. DeSantis and give our concerns about what the warmongering NATO is doing. As soon as the 10 completed their comments, that was the end of the meeting. And we were gently escorted out of NATO headquarters, but we did take some time to take a couple of pictures out once that we were outside the gates to show that we were there and ban nuclear weapons, ban depleted uranium. We also sent out a press release on Sunday from the Global Women about no sending of cluster bombs and depleted uranium weapons and no use of them. So this was a wonderful opportunity to get together with a lot of women from Europe that I had never run into that are a part of the peace movement. We will be continuing this, and we're hoping that there will be a large delegation from Europe that will be coming to Washington, D.C. in July of next year, where the 75th anniversary of NATO will be held in Washington, D.C. And of course, we invite everybody on this webinar to come to Washington with details to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to invite our board member, Agneta Norberg in Sweden, to come on, if you would, unmute yourself and give us briefly some words about the situation with Sweden joining NATO and all the other things that go with that. So Agneta, can you do that, please?
Well, I'm a little bit surprised I get the word, but anyhow, you hear me?
Yeah.
A coup d'etat, I would say, had been done in Sweden. Suddenly, last June, there's Social Democrat Magdalena Andersson declared that Sweden is planned to join NATO. No discussion, nothing. I consider it, and many with me, a sort of a coup d'etat. That's one thing. Other things are the media. After the new right-wing government took power, we have a right-wing media government, you know. The silencing of everything that could disturb the Swedish public had been taken away. You don't know, it's absolutely useless to watch news. I remember I was in United States in 1976, and I said to myself, how happy I am to live in Sweden, where you can put on TV and get some news, because there you couldn't get anything. It was just ridiculous. That was the official. How I myself have been treated is a story I would like to say in a few words. After the Russian has invaded Ukraine, 2022, I think in February or something, I wrote on Facebook, I hope the Russians will stay until they chased away the Nazis. This was taken up by the huge newspapers and printed in big letters what I had said. After that, I was excluded from all kinds of organizations. I was invited as a speaker in the north of Sweden to speak about space, and the authorities in this place, Jokkmokk, said if Agneta Norberg is allowed to speak, we will withdraw our fundings. There is ongoing a witch hunt. So on Facebook, I have been excluded eight times. I'm not allowed to print anything or say anything. It was just a short story about the Swedish situation. And it is rather frightening because Women for Peace, an organization I belong to, and I was founding it, was visited by authorities and urged them, the leaders, to look through the memberships, specifically a name, Agneta Norberg. They wanted the leaders to scrutinize who she really is. So they talked to me and said, what can we do? Well, I say, I don't want to take me away. I am still in Women, but I was not allowed to be a member of any grouping in our country, in any peace grouping that Women for Peace have. So there we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Agneta. You're one of the most tireless workers for peace we know, and stay with it. We love you. Next, I want to go to another one of our board members, Alice Slater in New York. Alice, please unmute.
Hi, and Agneta, I just want to say how sorry I am for what you have to go through, but we are all going through this right now with the Mickey Match, which Ray gave us this wonderful acronym that we should all memorize, and Bill referred to it, the Military Industrial Congressional Intelligence Media Academic Think Tank Complex. And we are all being brainwashed. We're in this sea of misinformation and Russia hating and China bashing in my country, in America. And I feel like one of the things on the space issue that's totally missing from every media report is how Russia and China have been begging us to negotiate a treaty to keep weapons out of space. They, you know, it started when we extended the NPT, and even after they agreed to it, they said their strategic security, this was back in '95, depends on keeping space free from weapons. And we never did that. We banned weapons of mass destruction in space, but we never banned this kind of horror that we've had explained to us so vividly and wonderfully. So I just, as people in the space network, I want us to remember to keep saying it over and over again when we're talking, that, you know, like Pogo said in the 1950s during the Red Scare, we met the enemy and he is us. It's not China and Russia, it's us. I mean, we're the ones that are expanding this thing, and Americans don't understand it. They've been so brainwashed. So we all have to do a little brainstorm of our own. How do we get this out there to bust through this horrible media blitz of propaganda? Thank you. And thanks for everything the network is doing. It's great. Thanks.
Thank you, Alice. Ellen Barfield, I think you wanted to promote an event. Do you want to come on and do that briefly, please?
Sure. Thanks, Bruce. It's not an event. It's already happening and well on the way. That would be the hope to be huge march addressed to the UN on September 17th before the Secretary General's climate summit, which, bless him, he is saying nations have to have a plan to get to zero fossils before they can even get in the door. I hope that holds. But what I'm inviting people to is a hub that's coming together to be very loud about the fact that militarism is probably the worst climate damager. The Pentagon is the biggest fossil fuel burner and CO2 emitter of any institution in the world. And we're trying to get a big bunch of people on the streets on September 17th to say, yes, the climate is in dire distress, and that's very largely due to militarism. Please, we must unite anti-militarism and anti-climate catastrophe. That's what I'm pushing. And there is a Zoom call next Tuesday afternoon at 2:00 Eastern Daylight Time that Code Pink is hosting and acting like they invented it, as they are prone to do. But that's okay. The issue is more important than credit. I will put out the link. I don't have it with me right now, but I will put it out widely, and other people are too. Hope people can come next Tuesday at 2:00 Eastern Daylight Time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Dave Webb, are you around? Are you there?
Around and here.
We've got about, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes left. You're the convener of our board. You manage our website. You do so much for the global network. And I wish you would take the time now to say the closing words over the next few minutes for this event, please.
Okay, pardon my croaky voice, but it's been great to hear from you all and from new members of the board, especially, I think. I'm going to try and we're recording this, so I'm going to try and put the recording so it's available from our website, so people who've missed the event can catch up. And I'll correct the sound. I'm sorry, the sound wasn't too good on a couple of my presentations. I'll correct all that before I put them on. So it's been great to have everyone. I mean, there's a heck of a lot to do. There's a lot of people out there trying to get the truth out, trying to get people to understand the importance of what's happening now. How our civilization, our planet is at stake at this moment. And people in charge, people in control, not in charge, but in control, are not taking these things seriously. We've got to try and make a really loud noise to show that most people in this world don't want the militarism that's being injected into us. We want a path for peace, and we want to live harmoniously together, take care of the planet. So thanks to everyone for coming. Thanks to Bruce for all that incredible work that you do, Bruce. You've done some amazing stuff. People wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. So thank you. And thanks to everyone for all the things that you can do. I hope we'll be able to put a break on this militaristic nonsense that's happening in time to save us all from some huge disaster. So thank you. Do what you can. Let's move. Let's get organized, as Bruce would say, and keep up the good work. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave. And again, thank you all for coming on this today. We're glad to see old friends, your faces, and new friends too. It's really a family, an international family. I'm glad to see our old friend McGregor, Eddie. Been a long time. Nice to see you. So anyway, everybody, good luck to you. And as I'm saying these days, keep paddling. All right. You're the leaders out there. We got to show leadership right now. We need leadership. Our country, our world needs leadership, and you're all leaders. So don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to tell your truth, as Agneta is modeling for us there in Sweden. Just keep telling the truth, and it's starting to crack, I think. Lisa and I frequently talk about this. Worm is beginning to turn, and I think it's happening because people are seeing the insanity of everything that the US and UK and NATO are doing. So keep pushing it, and God bless all of you. Bye-bye.